All right, and we are live. We do apologize for the delay. We were having some technical difficulties. So, welcome to tonight's webinar. We have entitled tonight's webinar, Turn ADHD into a Superpower. I think, unfortunately, when people get the diagnosis of ADHD, it often just gets looked at like this is going to be a lifelong thing, or just something that we're just going to have to get used to living with, or that your child still they might not be able to thrive just because they have this diagnosis. We don't believe that that's the case here at Steiner Family Chiropractic. We don't want anybody to get a label and then be limited by that for the rest of their lives. And ADHD is kind of the label that I was actually given when I was younger. I always had kind of difficulty paying attention in school, kind of getting my work done, and I always did pretty well in school, but I was always that kid that was bouncing off the walls, always was the kid who was interrupting others in class. I would get my work done early and then just kind of interrupt everybody else. I never really felt like I had quite the control over it that now I know that I have over the ADHD, and I think I can attribute pretty much all of that to chiropractic care. And I'm going to get into why that's the case, why a chiropractor is even talking about ADHD in the first place. And it really all comes down to the nerve system and how the nerve system functions, how the brain functions, and what happens with ADHD, and how chiropractic care can be kind of the window of how we can help. So starting off with ADHD, it's a fairly new diagnosis, probably in the last 100 years or so. Back in about 1902, a guy named Sir George Still, a British pediatrician, nicknamed the disease an abnormal defect of moral control in children. Basically, that these kids just couldn't control their morality, and that's why they had ADHD. He did note that it's not that the kids were not intelligent. He did note that most of the kids were still very intelligent, but they just couldn't quite control everything. And I think that's what we find a lot. It's not that kids with ADHD are less intelligent, or they're not smart, or they're dumb. That's probably the worst thing that we could think with the ADHD. I think a lot of what happens is kids with ADHD just learn differently. Their brains are structured differently, and they just learn differently. And it's, I think, a lot of an issue with just the way the school is structured now. Having kids trying to sit still, and if your brain doesn't work a certain way, that you're not going to thrive in that circumstance. And so we can get into all that later. That's a different conversation. But it really is not that the kids with ADHD aren't smart. They are oftentimes smarter than their peers. And so what we find is that they can excel in school if they're given the right tools. If you look back at throughout history, I think a lot of the people that actually changed society, a lot of the people that had all these great discoveries and did all these great things for us scientifically were those people that we would classify as ADHD. The Mozarts, the Einsteins, all these people would be probably given a diagnosis today and maybe not have allowed that full chance to develop the things that they did. So when we talk about ADHD, we talk about different areas of the brain, and they found that different areas of the brain aren't quite developed as much as they should be given the age of the child with ADHD. There's some pretty cool videos online about what exactly goes in, but mainly we're talking about areas like the frontal cortex. So the frontal cortex of your brain, basically what is involved in your decision making and your planning, kind of your executive functions, or the higher functions of the brain. They found kids with ADHD have actually developed that area a little bit slower compared to their counterparts, and there can be a number of different reasons for this. Some of the things that have been pointed to developing ADHD are maternal smoking, maternal stress. There's been some studies that have shown that the more stress a mother's under, that stress can kind of get locked into that child's nervous system. They can kind of interfere with that brain development. And that kind of leads me into that part of nervous system and brain development, and kind of what gets kicked off in these kids with ADHD and what exactly is going on. And I think a lot of times it does start at the birth process. And the birth process is a very wonderful thing, but unfortunately, babies' necks are very delicate and the birth canal is very narrow. And so there's a lot of times, and especially if there's an emergency or something like that, a lot of times we need to get the baby out quickly. And so often that birth process can involve a lot of pulling and twisting and bending of the neck. And unfortunately, if the baby's not allowed to get that checked or get that taken care of by a pediatric chiropractor, it can actually set the baby up for problems later on in life. And you might be asking yourself, why? Well, that gets into the chiropractic part of this story. So what we know as chiropractors is that our spine and the movement of our spine is absolutely vital to our health. We know that if we lose movement, all other aspects of our physiology go downhill. If anybody's ever has a family member, an older family member that suffers a fall or suffers an accident and they get immobilized, you know that their health deteriorates pretty quickly. Lots of research studies have shown that movement actually drives cell biology. That's a pretty cool fact. And moving less actually shrinks our brain. So people that exercise more throughout middle age and getting into adulthood, their brains will actually maintain in size, but the less we move, our brains will actually shrink. So movement is brain food. And one aspect of movement that we're vitally concerned with is proprioception. So I talk about this a lot with the kids in the office. I call proprioception our spidey sense. And proprioception is quite simply knowing where the rest of your body's at in space. So I can take one of my fingers here and I can place it kind of right behind my back right there, and now I can rely on my other 5 senses. So I can't see my finger right now. I can't touch it, taste it, hear it, or smell it. But what I can do is close my eyes right here, put my other hand behind my back, and I can grab my finger. The way I did that was proprioception. Even though I couldn't sense my finger, my brain still knew where it was. That is proprioception. Now, proprioception gets fired off every time we move or don't move. Now, positive movement, proprioception, is good for our brains. Again, movement is vital to life. However, if things get stuck, if the bones of our spine get stuck, or they misalign, or they fixate, it actually decreases the amount of proprioception we have and opens up what we call nociception. Now, nociception you can think of as negative information to the brain. So it's almost like nociception is you're at a fine dining restaurant and they're blaring Metallica in the background. That's nociception. So that information is going to the brain. And think about it. Do you think you could sit down and take a test if Metallica was blaring in the background? Do you think you would have a nice meal at a restaurant? You know, there's a reason why they don't play AC/DC in an elevator, because, you know, that's designed to keep you calm. So when we have decreased proprioception, it opens that door for nociception to enter the brain and shift us over time. Our portion of our nerve system that kind of deals with things going on behind the scenes, it will actually shift that into what we call sympathetic mode. So our nerve system is got 2 parts. So the first part is our voluntary nerve system. Voluntary nerve system is if I drop something, I bend over to pick it up, and I'm thinking about doing that all consciously. Now, there is stuff that's going on behind the scenes. So right now, I'm not having to think about my breathing. I'm not having to think about my digestion or my heart rate or anything that's going on behind the scenes. And that's under the control of my autonomic nervous system. So it's our automatic nervous system. We can think of it like that. Now that's subdivided into 2 parts as well. So the first part of that automatic nerve system is what we call our sympathetic branch, or our fight or flight. So if you can imagine me down by the river, I'm a caveman. I got the beard already, so you can kind of, it already works. So pretend I'm eating a fish down by the river, and all of a sudden, big saber-toothed tiger jumps out at me. Now I've got 2 choices. If I'm smart, I'm going to run away as quick as possible. But I might decide that I want to try to fight this tiger to keep my meal. Most likely, I'm going to run. So the sympathetic nerve system was what kicks on. It elevates my heart rate, expands my chest, helps me take big, deep breaths and try to get all the blood I can to my muscles so I can run away or fight. Now, that sympathetic mode is using hormones like cortisol, noradrenaline, norepinephrine to kind of get my body up and alert. And if, say, I safely get away from the tiger, hopefully I did, or I could successfully fought him off, when I'm away and I want to continue eating the fish that I was, or I want to lay down and take a nap, my parasympathetic mode, which is that second side of the nerve system, is going to kick in. And that's going to calm me down. That's going to kick my vagus nerve in, going to help me relax, digest the food that I was eating, and kind of take a nap, and then, you know, be okay. And normally throughout our lives, we're shifting back and forth. You know, I like to think of the sympathetic mode as the gas pedal and the parasympathetic mode as the brake pedal. So you can imagine throughout the course of our lives, sometimes we need to press the gas, sometimes we need to press the brake. But what happens is if we have chronic nociceptive input because the bones of our spine are stuck, or they're misaligned, they're not moving correctly, we're getting chronic nociceptive input going to the brain. Over time, that's going to slam the gas pedal to the floor, and all of a sudden our physiology is always stuck in fight or flight. And if you think about it, that sounds a lot like a kid with ADHD. Their gas is going. We call these kids raging bull kids in here, and I'll tell you why in a second. You know, their physiology and their nerve systems are so stuck in that fight or flight, they're always looking for something in their environment that's stressing them out. And you can, whether it's school, whether it's things, you know, these kids have the sensory issues, whether it's just too much, they can't just quite integrate everything right away. And so their nerve system just, you know, revved on 24/7. They're just in that fight or flight mode. And so it's no wonder that they can't sit down and focus in school. They can't. You know, a lot of times these kids have these gastric issues and immune issues. And if you think about it, if I'm running away from that tiger, I'm not thinking about using the restroom. I'm not thinking about fighting off an infection. All I think about is survival. So these kids are stuck in that stress and survival mode. They're not ever able to get in that parasympathetic mode. And it's somewhat, their brains are spinning so fast, it's almost like they have Ferrari engines. So they got this super nice car engine. Their brains are working just so fast, working on overdrive, but they got the brakes of a tricycle. So they can't ever quite put the brakes on. And what we know is that chiropractic adjustments are able to stop that loop, replace that negative proprioceptive information or negative nociceptive information with positive proprioception information. And when we do that with enough adjustments, we'll slowly shift our physiology back into that restful parasympathetic mode, that growth, that repair mode, and actually allow our physiology and our neurology to calm down and better focus. And this is really exactly what we see with chiropractic. Kids that have ADHD that have been diagnosed, if they come in, they're that raging bull kid, they get on the gas pedal. We can see on some of the technology that we use in the office, which is our Insight scanning system, which has 3 parts. So we can actually measure the temperature around the spine. We can actually measure the amount of energy that the spine is generating just under normal resting conditions. And a lot of times these kids, their spines are, their nervous systems are just kicking out energy all the time. And we can actually measure that, and we can track that progress. And we can also track things like their heart rate and how, even if we're sitting in a quiet room, we still hear that Metallica, we still hear that AC/DC. We can actually measure that AC/DC music on a graph, and we can show before and after improvements with kids with ADHD. And it really is, once we adjust the spine, once we break up that fixation and get that vertebrae and the spine moving correctly again, we stop that nociceptive information going to the brain. So that nociceptive is negative information, and we replace it with normal proprioception, which is soothing, which is calming for the brain. And that's really what we need. And unfortunately, I think that we get these diagnoses and they become a label that we have to have for the rest of our lives, and the answer is just take medicine and just take therapy. And I do think those things can have their place, but there are things that we can do outside of that. It doesn't have to be, let's put my kid on medication when he's 6 years old and that's just it. We don't have to do those things. You as parents, you have a choice on what you want to do for your child. One of my passions particularly is helping kids with ADHD, because I know how much I was helped with chiropractic care for it. And I would never say that chiropractic care cured me. My chiropractor didn't even treat my ADHD. He treated my spine not moving correctly and kind of calmed that nociceptive information down and let my brain work better with the amount that I do have. And so that is the chiropractic care. We adjust the spine, we restore normal movement, and we allow the brain to better integrate and better work as it should be. There are other things that we can do with ADHD. I want to go into some of those now. I want to give you some other tips. Maybe you're not ready for chiropractic care right now. I hope you are. And if you are, please let us know after this Facebook Live, and we would love to see if we can help. I would never say that I know for sure I can help your kid, but we need to scan them. We need to see exactly what their nervous system is doing, and then we can say with confidence that we can help. But I would love the opportunity to do that. So a lot of people say, it's sugar, it's all these other foods that can cause symptoms of ADHD. It's never been actually shown definitively that sugar does cause the ADHD. However, many mothers do report positive effects when they eliminate sugar from the child's diet. And I say, hey, if that works for you, go ahead and do that. A lot of these sugars can be hidden in foods and things like high fructose corn syrup. So I think overall, we don't really get into a ton of diet advice here in the office, but the simplest diet advice I can give with ADHD is just choose real whole foods, things that you can pronounce, things that don't have 60 ingredients on the ingredient label. And if you're in the store, stick to the outside of the grocery store. The outside of the grocery store has all your produce, all your vegetables, all the good meat, all the good eggs and things like that, or good brain food. Most of the stuff in the middle aisle is kind of just that processed stuff that really doesn't have a lot of nutritional value. And I do find this is probably the thing that takes the most effort, especially if you have a child that's struggling, and maybe you got other kids, maybe your husband works, maybe you work, maybe you're kind of spread so many different ways, and maybe you don't have time to cook all these nice meals. And again, it does take a concerted and focused effort, but I do think if that's a way you want to go down it might be able to help. And one of the things that I love, and when I'm working on projects here in the office or I'm studying, is playing classical music, particularly music from the Baroque period or things from Beethoven and Bach or Mozart, actually will change the waves in the brain. So normally our brains kind of vibrate at certain frequencies, and there's different types of waves. We don't need to get into all of it right now, but classical music has actually been shown to shift the brain waves if you are in a stress sympathetic mode, kind of help calm that down and dampen that a little bit and put you in to a lower wavelength where you're more prone to be relaxed, you're more prone to be able to concentrate. So I love listening to classical music. That's one of the biggest changes that I've made that's helped me tremendously. And I talk to teachers, and a lot of teachers are now finding that they're playing classical music in the background at school, and kids are better able to focus. So that is awesome, especially during tests. I don't see why there would be any reason why we wouldn't want to do that in the classroom for kids. It really does help, and it's helped me. One of my favorite techniques is if I'm having to do some complicated work or having to work on presentations or things like that in the office, if I got a lot of subject matter kind of getting in all at once, I like to use what's known as the Pomodoro technique. Now, the Pomodoro technique was developed by a psychologist, and what it involves is deciding on a task that you want to do. Say I want to read this book, or I want to write my homework paper. I want to do my math homework. Okay, so normally, let's say, you know, a lot of times these kids with ADHD, they can work really hard for a period of time, and then it just gets too much and they zone out and they, you know, get just overwhelmed and can't do it anymore. Well, the Pomodoro technique kind of takes that and actually makes it of benefit. So this involves getting a task that you want to get done. Let's say it's your math homework, and we say, all right, for the next 20 to 25 minutes, all I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on this math homework. And after that 25 minutes, I get to take a break. That's 5 minutes. I get to go run around. I get to go look at whatever I want to look at on the internet. Cool videos, things like that. I get to play with the dog. I get to get a drink of water, get a snack, things like that in that 5-minute break. And then I come back and do another 20 or 25-minute session. And then I take another 5-minute break. So it's kind of that reward, and then we get to learn that we can focus for shorter periods of time. You can even start with 5-minute increments. Say, all right, all I have to do for the next 5 minutes is read this book or do this homework, and then take a break, and then keep going back. But it's breaking things up into intervals with breaks spaced in between. And then after 3 or 4 of those intervals of, you know, hard work, so we're going to work for 20 minutes, take 5 minutes off, work for 20 more minutes, take another 5 minutes off, and then work for 20 minutes. After that, take a 30-minute break. Go outside, go do something, go, you know, get some fresh air. And that really, I have found to be the most effective thing for me as far as helping me get things done in an efficient manner. I find that if I'm able to just hyper focus, and I can get so much work done in those deep periods of time, in those 25-minute increments, that it probably would have taken me 2 hours if I was kind of just going back and forth, kind of the way my see a squirrel, run with it brain works. So I found that to be very effective, and obviously getting adjusted. I get adjusted a lot, and it really does help me kind of put the brakes on it. So I think with the diet, with the chiropractic adjustments, with the spaced interval Pomodoro technique, with the classical music, you really can turn this into your child's superpower. Their brains are great. It's not that their brains are faulty. They didn't get, you know, just kind of a bad roll of the dice in life, and they have ADHD and this is it. No, we can turn this around. We can unlock this. We can turn this into their very own superpower. And again, it goes back to all the way at the beginning when they were first talking about kids with ADHD. It wasn't that they weren't smart. It's just that they couldn't quite control and kind of direct that ability of what they have. Again, they got Ferrari engines. They got the top of the line engine brain that can get so much done so quickly, but they got the brakes of a tricycle. And what we can do with lifestyle interventions, with chiropractic care, is we can upgrade those brakes and help your child get broken out of that stress physiology, broken out of that gas pedal 24/7, and teach them to actually turn the brakes on. So we can take this ADHD, what was once thought as a hindrance, and really turn it around and kind of make this your own child's superpower. I would love to see if we can help you do that with your child. I've experienced the benefits for myself in my life, and I would love to see if we can help you or your child. So I hope you guys enjoyed this webinar. Please come back with any questions or any references. I would love to provide those guys for you. So I hope you guys have a good night, and we'll see you in our next webinar.